All right, hi everyone. Today we're here to learn about how to do a proper pros and cons analysis, which is taken from the DBT skills manual. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with how to do a pros and cons and evaluate like the advantages and disadvantages of engaging in some sort of behavior or just making a decision, right? Whether you're aware of it or not, we do these probably every day. So when my alarm goes off in the morning, I either decide if hitting the snooze button or turning it off is worth it to me. Yes, I'll get some extra sleep and I might feel better, but I could also get in serious trouble if I miss maybe like an important appointment. Um, you and I certainly have had the tough call of deciding whether to order takeout or make whatever else you have in the fridge to save some money, especially after like a long day of work. Don't really feel like cooking. So we all use this skill to make decisions day to day, right? Sometimes a little bit more deliberate use of the skill can be more appropriate though. So in this video, I'm going to introduce you to specific specific way to make a pros and cons analysis, which involves listing the pros and cons of both doing the behavior and not doing the behavior, like the problem behavior, right? Doing it this way can give you a lot of additional information that you might not have considered before, right? So if anyone has struggled with resisting impulses or problematic or destructive urges, writing out the pros and cons of acting and not acting on those urges can help you make really wise decisions that may be more effective in the short term and long term and lead to better results. So this can also be really helpful for changing mood-dependent behaviors. So for examples, some examples are like engaging in self-harm, suicidal behaviors, could be binge eating, binge drinking, using substances. It could be screaming at a friend or a boss, putting off responsibilities, keeping up with treatment if you're in some sort of treatment, breaking off a toxic relationship, and many more, right? So take a second to reflect on any potentially problematic behaviors you might have, where it might be helpful to evaluate the pros and cons of various choices that you have control over. Okay, so let's get into how to actually do this type of pros and cons by walking through an example together. Right, we'll do one. So to start, you want to describe the problem behavior or crisis behavior you're trying to stop. This is any behavior that in the short run, long run, or both is damaging to your self-interest and well-being. Right, so today we'll focus on binge drinking. Okay. So as I said earlier, doing a proper pros and cons involves writing down the positive and negative consequences of tolerating distress by resisting impulsive behaviors, as well as the positive and negative consequences of not tolerating distress by engaging in impulsive behaviors. So at the top here, we'll evaluate the pros and cons of binge drinking, and at the bottom, we'll evaluate the pros and cons of not binge drinking and using other skills, maybe more effective skills. All right, so let's start with engaging in the urge of binge drinking. So maybe after getting home from a stressful day at work, you got reprimanded by your boss, maybe some poor performance. They perceived your performance as being poor. You didn't like that, right? And you had the urge to just drive to a bar and get really drunk. Okay. So what might be the pros of this? So one might be a good distraction. Okay. Whoops. Okay. Yeah, so when you drink, you might forget about your problems, right? It's going off that. If you're not thinking about it, if you're distracted, the pain might go away, right? Less pain there, okay. So going even further than that, drinking might even change your emotions, so it might even make you feel good. So not only does it get rid of your pain or your negative emotions, but now you're feeling kind of positive emotions. So you might feel good, right, in the moment. Let's say on your way to the bar, you call up your buddy, tell him to meet you at the bar, and so now you're out being social and having fun. Okay, all pros. All right, so what about some of the cons here? So, um, let's see. So sometimes the drinking may relieve your pain, but other times, or maybe even more frequently, it'll only make it more intense. So the alcohol can intensify our emotions, might even become more depressed or in more pain. So okay, you might feel some intense guilt or shame too for going out and drinking. So right, intense guilt, shame. You might get sick from the alcohol and get a hangover the next day, especially if you're like binge drinking heavily. Um, get sick, right? Maybe at the bar, you might be a little bit more tempted to engage in other risky behaviors like getting into a fight or just generally putting yourself in danger. Oops, risky. Increased chance of risky behaviors. Um, you top that off, we'll just say that you miss a really good opportunity to practice a new skill or a new way of coping, right? Okay, so you might be able to identify some more. So awesome, just keep note of it. All right, second part. Let's move on to the second part, which is evaluating the pros and cons of not binge drinking, maybe using another more effective skill, right? So this is a step that many people don't take or don't even think to take, right? Admittedly, like until I learned about this skill, this process never even occurred to me, at least consciously. But we have a really good opportunity now to learn even more and get even more information by taking this extra step. Okay, so let's look at the pros of refraining from drinking and using a skill. So if you refrain, you have less of chance of making a mistake or hurting yourself and maybe hurting others. Hurting self/others, making a mistake. Um, what else? You might have a better chance to resolve the problem. So we're not escaping or avoiding the problem. We might have the opportunity to change something or learn something as well. Maybe if you do successfully use an alternative or more effective skill, especially if it works, you might also feel more empowered and have a sense of building mastery towards something. Right? You might even feel more in control of your life and even enhance your self-respect. Let's see, you might also just develop a new habit that can lead to more skillful living down the road when confronted with this problem, or again, or maybe like a similar one, right? New habit. Um, let's say in this hypothetical, you have some kids, right? You might set a really good example on how to effectively manage stress, right? Okay, what about the cons here? So drinking may relieve your stress faster. So a con of not drinking would that be you can't escape your negative emotions as fast. Um, can't. stress as fast, as quickly. Okay. Let's see, that's it. Skills use and stopping or forming new habits also takes a lot of effort, and definitely be more difficult for you. So increased effort and difficulty. Okay. So now that we've written out the pros and cons, we want to go back and look at whether each pro and con has a long-term, short-term, or both effect or both. So a long-term effect, short-term effect, or both. This can help you make a wiser and more informed decision. So let's go back to the pros of binge drinking. So looking at distraction and pain relief, we can call those short-term effects because it doesn't necessarily solve a problem. Maybe distracted temporarily or temporarily relieved. The problem will still be there once you sober up. Okay, so let's put those as short-term, short-term. Okay. What else? So I guess the same with feeling good, right? Alcohol may improve your mood, but what's going to happen when it wears off, right? So call that short term. What about being social and having fun? Again, I would call that a short-term effect because eventually, you have to leave. Yeah, sure, you're having fun right now, you're going to have fun, but possibly at the expense of solving the problem, which will, again, still be around when you're done. So I'm going to put that as short-term effect. Okay. All right, so moving on to the cons, right? Let's look at some of these. So more emotional pain or increased negative emotions can have both short-term and long-term effects, I would say. So short-term in that immediately you'll feel worse, and long-term in that guilt or shame you have, may roll into the next day and can also, negatively affect you in the long run if it causes you to engage in some like more problematic behaviors later on. So we'll put short-term and long-term. Okay. Let's see. So getting sick and hungover, I'd say is relatively temporary. So we'll put that in short term. Yes, I mean, we know that alcohol can cause you to be sick, but eventually you'll get better unless you have some sort of, medical condition, which is, more, not really relevant to this particular one, but it can very well be, right? So let's see, we can also think about it like if your problem at work was performance-based and you're showing up hungover, right, you might not be as effective and that might show, right? So we can actually put that maybe as a long-term effect as well, right? So in terms of like the physical illness, it's short-term, but long-term, if you're showing up to work hungover, when you're already being reprimanded for poor performance, that might, further lead you to get, even more, reprimand and possibly lose your job. So I'm going to put short-term and long-term effect. Okay. All right, so more risky behaviors can have both short-term and long-term effect as well. So short-term, you might get kicked out of the bar, right? You might get a black eye. Long-term could be put in jail, right? Negatively impact many aspects of your life. So short-term and long-term. You might have the urge to, be engaged in like infidelity in your relationship, right? Things like that all have long-term effects. Finally, missing an opportunity for skill use has both short and long-term effects as well, right? Skills can work immediately and also can lead to long-term well-being and a lifetime of skills use and greater well-being. So short-term, long-term. Okay. So now, of course, we want to evaluate the same short and long-term effects in the bottom row, right? So starting with the pros of refraining, and skills use. So in terms of reduced chances of making mistakes, that's a short and long-term benefit, right? As mistakes can affect us immediately and into the future, right? Having a greater chance of resolving the problem also has a short and long-term effect, right? It's just a natural consequence of not avoiding the problem, and if we can be effective. So short-term, long-term, short-term and long-term. Okay. Let's see. So increasing our self-respect and feeling more mastery can have both short and long-term effects as well, I would say. There can be immediate improvements in mood right away and into the next day or week, knowing that you're taking positive steps towards your goals, right, or solving your problems. It's also just generally nice to feel more in control, short-term and long-term, right? Okay, new habit. So developing a new habit can certainly have a long-term effect, right? New habits of effective skills in the face of your problems. If you keep working at that, you can maybe start habitually responding to problems in this new manner. So I would call that long-term. Okay. Setting a good example for your kids. I would say that's certainly a long-term effect, right? So you're essentially setting them up for success by modeling effective ways to problem solve. So we know that kids are like little sponges and pick up on a lot more than we might think. Let's go by maybe going out and binge drinking. You're modeling that this is how people handle their problems, right? By avoiding. I'm gonna put long-term there. Okay. All right, so now lastly, we get to evaluating the short and long-term effects of the cons of refraining from drinking and using skills. So in terms of not being able to escape feelings and relieve your distress immediately, that has a short and long-term effect, I would say. So short-term, obviously you're going to feel the same and not get that immediate relief that drinking gives you. But long-term, you might come to recognize that distress is tolerable and not something that needs to be avoided, right? Distress is a normal part of life, as well as all other negative emotions. So I'll put that as short and long-term. So lastly, more effort has a short-term effect. Eventually the problem gets solved and you don't need to put forth, you don't need to put forth the effort eventually, right? So maybe allowing yourself to sit with the stress and difficulty, you can make some sort of like awesome breakthrough. At the same time, it definitely will be more uncomfortable immediately, right? Don't want to minimize that. So short term. Okay. All right, so now what we want to do is sit back and kind of evaluate all the short and long-term benefits and consequences of engaging and not engaging in the behavior and notice any patterns maybe. So which choices provide greater short and long-term benefits for you? Does one decision outweigh the other? That's something for you to decide, right? So hopefully the wise choice here is evident for you, even though it might not be the easiest or most comfortable option, right? But is it worth it to you? That's the question. Okay, so we did a pretty thorough pros and cons here, right? I can imagine that some other people might have identified a few other pros and cons, maybe some other short and long-term effects that I might not have noticed or missed. It's great. So now that we have all this written out, what do we actually do with it, right? So one important thing to remember is that this is done before the behavioral urge emerges. So if you know you have a recurring problem behavior, or you know that later that day maybe you might be tempted with whatever it may be, you want to make one of these beforehand. All right. Once you're able to fully evaluate all the options and decide which is in your best interest and maybe aligned with your personal goals, values, you want to rehearse and review this sheet. Okay, the idea here is that when the urge does hit, this whole process and decisions will more easily pop into your mind and help you make a wise choice in the moment. Having the actual pros and cons available for you to review is always, that's helpful, but we might not always be in situations that allow us to pull out our phones or look over this whole, a physical sheet maybe, right? So you might also want to share this with a trusted other who can maybe prompt you during a crisis urge or moment when you may be more vulnerable to making an impulsive decision, since we can sometimes get consumed by our emotions, which makes it a lot more difficult to make wise choices. Um, Having many different pros and cons for various urges and behaviors we have is also key. So it may not just be one urge we have that is potentially ineffective or work against us, right? Likely there's going to be a lot more, not a lot more, but maybe some others, right? So maybe take the time to write all these down, and maybe prepare for when that urge does emerge and have them ready to go to review at a moment's notice. So take a picture, put them in your phone, write a list in your phone, maybe somewhere a little bit more hidden if you're worried about someone finding it. You can make copies and stick them in places you frequently are. So in this case, with the binge drinking, maybe put it in your car, put it in like your glove compartment, glove box, whatever. Maybe like if you're tempted to drive to the bar after work, right? That's like where you'll be when you're facing that temptation or that urge a lot of the time. So you want to put that, where it'll be most effective for you, most helpful. Put them in places in your house where these problems typically arise or these urges typically arise, and where you'll have easy like physical access to them as well, right? If you're comfortable doing that, where you live, you can put sticky notes around, put them in drawers, bedside table, wherever it is most helpful and going to be most effective for you overall. Okay. All right, so overall, that was how to do a proper pros and cons analysis based on the DBT skills manual. And I hope that was very helpful for y'all.